After abandoning his paralyzed wife alone for money, 2 years later he came back to beg for forgiveness and was shocked by what he found. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Marriott fell silent as security guards rushed toward the stage. Robert Mitchell, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his face twisted with desperation, fought against their grip. "Sarah, please, I beg you, forgive me," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. Sarah Collins sat frozen in her wheelchair at the podium, her hand clutching the microphone. The crystal trophy of the American Dream Foundation glinted under the spotlights, forgotten. The audience of over 1,000 people watched in shock as the scene unfolded before them. In the front row, Greg Thompson slowly rose from his seat, his jaw clenched, ready to intervene. 2 years earlier, the small church in Millbrook, Tennessee, was filled with the sound of piano music on a crisp December morning. Sarah's fingers danced across the keys as she played Silent Night for the Sunday service. At 28, she was a vision of grace and beauty, her long blonde hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. Her slight baby bump, just visible beneath her flowing dress at 5 months pregnant, made her glow even more. Pastor Mike often said Sarah was a gift from God to their community. Not only was she the most talented piano teacher in town, but she also volunteered at the local orphanage, teaching music to underprivileged children. Everyone loved her, especially her husband of 2 years, Robert Mitchell. Or so they thought. Robert stood at the back of the church, checking his phone instead of watching his wife play. At 45, he was a successful real estate broker with ambitions far beyond their small town. His recent deals weren't going as planned, and the debts were piling up. But nobody knew about that yet, not even Sarah. After the service, Sarah noticed Robert's distraction. "Is everything okay, honey?" she asked, placing her hand on his arm. "Just business," he replied curtly, shrugging off her touch. "I have a meeting tomorrow in Chicago. Might be gone for a few days." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "But what about the doctor's appointment? We're supposed to find out if it's a boy or a girl." "You can tell me when I get back," Robert said, already walking toward his Mercedes. That evening, Sarah had agreed to play at a charity concert for the orphanage. The winter rain was getting heavier as she drove her modest Honda along the dark country roads. She was thinking about Robert's strange behavior lately, how he'd grown distant since she got pregnant. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Glancing down for just a second, she never saw the drunk driver's truck run the red light. The impact was devastating. Hours later, Robert paced the hospital waiting room, not out of concern for his wife, but wondering how they would pay for the mounting medical bills. His insurance wouldn't cover everything, and his secret debts were already overwhelming. When Dr. Thompson delivered the news, Robert's world crumbled for entirely different reasons than Sarah's would. She had lost the baby, and she would never walk again. "The paraplegia is permanent," Dr. Thompson explained gently. "With proper rehabilitation, she can still lead a fulfilling life, but she'll need extensive care and support." Robert's face went pale as the doctor listed the costs of rehabilitation, equipment, and home modifications. All he could think about was the opportunity waiting in Chicago, the deal that could make him millions. But it would require his full attention, with no distractions, no responsibilities, no wheelchair-bound wife. As he stood there, pretending to listen to Dr. Thompson's explanation of Sarah's long road ahead, Robert Mitchell made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. He just didn't know how much. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness in the ICU. Through the haze of pain medication, she heard fragments of conversations between doctors and nurses. Her mind kept returning to the last image before the crash, the headlights coming straight at her. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Dr. Thompson's voice cut through the fog. "Can you hear me?" She tried to nod, but even that small movement sent waves of pain through her body. The doctor's expression was grave as he delivered the news that would forever change her life. "I'm so sorry," he began, "but we couldn't save the baby." Sarah's world stopped. She heard herself screaming, but it felt distant, as if someone else was making the sound. Nurses rushed in to sedate her as the full weight of the loss crashed over her. When she regained consciousness hours later, Dr. Thompson returned with more devastating news. The injury to her spine was severe. She would never walk again. Robert stood in the corner of the room, his face unreadable. Instead of coming to comfort his wife, he was on his phone, arguing with the insurance company. "What do you mean it's not covered?" he snapped. "Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost?" Sarah watched him through tears, desperately needing his support, but feeling him slip away with every passing moment. The following days became a blur of tests, consultations, and crushing realizations. The physical therapist explained the long journey ahead, months of rehabilitation, learning to navigate life in a wheelchair, modifications needed for their home. Each new piece of information seemed to make Robert more distant. "We can't afford this," he muttered one evening, thinking Sarah was asleep. "Everything I've worked for, gone." A week after the accident, Sarah overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for her ears. Robert was in the hallway, talking to someone on his phone. "Yes, I understand it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," he said in a hushed voice. "But my wife, no, you're right. The Chicago deal won't wait forever. How much did you say? 10 million? There was a long pause. "And I'd have to relocate immediately? No distractions?" Sarah's heart pounded. She knew what was coming before it happened. The next morning, instead of Robert, she found an envelope on her hospital bedside table. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note. "I can't do this, Sarah. The medical bills will ruin us both. This is better for everyone. Don't try to contact me. Robert." The nurses found her an hour later, curled up as much as her broken body would allow, sobbing uncontrollably. The check and note had fallen to the floor, where a nurse's shoe now stepped on them. Dr. Thompson came running when he heard the commotion. As he tried to calm Sarah, his expression changed from concern to anger as he read the discarded note. "That coward," he muttered, his fists clenching. What neither Sarah nor Dr. Thompson knew was that Robert had already emptied their joint bank accounts. The $50,000 check he'd left behind wasn't even his money. It was borrowed from someone who had their own reasons for wanting him in Chicago. As Sarah lay there, her world completely shattered. An elderly woman watched from the doorway. Eleanor Thompson's heart broke for the young woman before her, seeing in Sarah's devastation a reflection of her own painful past. What Sarah didn't know then was that this moment, rock bottom, would become the foundation for an extraordinary journey of healing, redemption, and unexpected love. But first, she would have to survive the darkest days of her life. The arrival of Greg Thompson in Millbrook sent whispers through the small town. Local real estate agents recognized him as the rising star behind Chicago's biggest development projects. But for Robert Mitchell, Greg's presence stirred up darker memories from their past. "Well, if it isn't Robert Mitchell," Greg said, walking into Robert's office unannounced. "Still selling the same small-town properties?" Robert's face tightened. "What do you want, Greg? Millbrook's a bit small for your usual projects." Greg settled into a chair, his expression unreadable. "Actually, I'm here with an offer. $10 million for you to oversee our new Chicago development." Robert's eyes widened. This was the break he'd been dreaming of. "There's one condition," Greg continued. "You start immediately. No loose ends here. No distractions." Robert's thoughts went to Sarah in the hospital, the mounting medical bills, the modifications their house would need, the lifetime of care ahead. "Your wife's accident is unfortunate," Greg said, as if reading his thoughts. "But business is business. The offer expires in 24 hours. That night, Robert paced his empty house. The bank statements scattered across his desk showed the brutal truth. They were nearly bankrupt. The medical bills alone would ruin them. His phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Sarah was asking for him. He ignored it. Instead, he logged into their joint accounts. With a few clicks, he transferred everything to his personal account. His hands shook as he wrote the note and check. "The $50,000 should help with immediate expenses," he told himself, trying to justify his actions. He didn't mention that the money was actually a loan from Greg. The next morning, before sunrise, Robert packed his bags. He placed the envelope on Sarah's bedside table while she slept. For a moment, he watched her peaceful face, remembering their wedding day. Then he turned and walked away. What Robert didn't know was that Sarah wasn't asleep. She lay there, eyes closed, tears rolling silently down her cheeks as she listened to his footsteps fade away. Later that day, Sarah received another blow. The hospital's billing department informed her that their insurance claims were being denied. The representative's words hit her like physical blows. "Mrs. Mitchell, these bills total over $200,000, and that's just the beginning." Sarah tried calling Robert repeatedly. Each time, an automated message informed her the number was disconnected. When she finally checked their joint accounts from her hospital tablet, she discovered they were empty. The mortgage payment was overdue, and bills were piling up. The final strike came in the form of a foreclosure notice delivered to her hospital room. The bank was giving her 30 days to catch up on payments or vacate the house. The weight of everything, the loss of her baby, her paralysis, Robert's abandonment, and now financial ruin, crushed Sarah's spirit. That evening, a nurse found her with an empty pill bottle beside her bed. Code blue. The hospital room erupted in chaos as medical staff rushed to save her life. In the hallway, Eleanor Thompson watched the scene unfold. She'd come to check on Sarah after hearing about Robert's departure. Her son Greg had warned her this might happen, but seeing it was different. History repeating itself, Eleanor whispered, remembering her own past. But this time, she wouldn't stand by and watch. This time, she would step in. What Eleanor didn't reveal was her connection to Greg, or why he had really come to Millbrook. Some truths would have to wait. Right now, saving Sarah was all that mattered. As the medical team worked to stabilize Sarah, Eleanor made a silent promise. She would help this young woman rebuild her life, even if it meant confronting the painful secrets of their intertwined past. Sarah woke up in the psychiatric ward 3 days after her suicide attempt. The sterile room felt like a prison, but it was nothing compared to the prison of her thoughts. "You've got a visitor," the nurse announced, wheeling in Sarah's new wheelchair with Eleanor Thompson following behind. "Why did you save me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I have nothing left to live for." Eleanor pulled up a chair beside Sarah's bed. "That's what I thought 30 years ago when my husband did the same thing to me." Sarah turned to look at Eleanor, really seeing her for the first time. The older woman's eyes held a pain that matched her own. "He left me with 3 children and a mountain of debt," Eleanor continued. "I wanted to die too, but God had other plans." Over the next few days, Eleanor became a constant presence in Sarah's life. She brought homemade food, helped Sarah learn to navigate her wheelchair, and most importantly, listened. "We need to talk about your house," Eleanor said one afternoon. "I spoke with the bank." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the latest foreclosure notice. "Robert didn't just empty our accounts. He left me with unpaid taxes, credit card debt, and a second mortgage I didn't even know about." "Let me help you sort through this," Eleanor offered, pulling out a notepad. As they went through the paperwork, the full extent of Robert's deception became clear. He'd been taking loans and maxing out credit cards for months before the accident. "The house goes up for auction in 2 weeks, Sarah said, fighting back tears. "I have nowhere to go." "Yes, you do," Eleanor replied firmly. "You're coming to stay with me." Before Sarah could protest, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Greg Thompson, looking uncomfortable, carried a stack of legal documents. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but you need to see these, Sarah. They're Robert's loan applications from the last 6 months." Sarah's hands shook as she read through the papers. Robert had been planning his escape long before her accident, systematically draining their resources and building a financial safety net for himself. "There's more," Greg said hesitantly. "He's already in Chicago, working on a major development project. He used your joint assets as collateral for a business loan." Sarah felt the room spinning. Eleanor quickly grabbed her hand, steadying her. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked Greg suspiciously. "You don't even know me." Greg and Eleanor exchanged a quick glance that Sarah didn't notice. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to make things right," he replied. That evening, as Eleanor helped Sarah settle into her new room, Sarah noticed an old photograph on the hallway wall. It showed a much younger Eleanor with 3 children, and one of them looked exactly like Greg. "Eleanor?" Sarah started to ask, but the older woman quickly changed the subject. "Tomorrow we'll start physical therapy," Eleanor said, "and then we'll figure out what's next, one step at a time." Later that night, Sarah overheard a heated conversation between Eleanor and Greg in the kitchen. She's not ready to know everything, Eleanor whispered urgently. She's too fragile right now. We can't keep lying to her, Greg responded. Robert's going to realize soon that the Chicago deal isn't what he thought. When he does, by then she'll be stronger, Eleanor interrupted. She has to be. Sarah lay in bed, questions swirling in her mind. What weren't they telling her? Why did Greg really come to Millbrook? And why did Eleanor seem so invested in her recovery? But exhausted from the day's emotions, Sarah drifted off to sleep before she could piece it all together. In her dreams, she was still walking, still pregnant, still living her perfect life. The reality that awaited her in the morning would be harder, but for the first time since the accident, she wasn't facing it alone. 3 months after moving in with Eleanor, Sarah received a letter that changed everything. Her parents' old beach house in Florida had sold, leaving her with an unexpected inheritance of $300,000. God works in mysterious ways, Eleanor said, watching Sarah read the letter. Your parents are still taking care of you. Sarah wiped away tears. But what do I do with it? The medical bills alone. Wait, Eleanor interrupted, pulling out a newspaper. Look at this. The article showed a local music school closing down. Think about it, Eleanor continued. You're the best piano teacher in town. Why not start your own school? Who would want lessons from someone in a wheelchair? Sarah asked bitterly. Actually, Eleanor said, I know someone who would. The next day, Eleanor introduced Sarah to Maria, her housekeeper, whose son Tommy had Down syndrome. He loves music, Maria explained, but the other schools won't take him. Sarah spent that afternoon with Tommy, watching his face light up as she taught him simple melodies. For the first time since the accident, she felt a spark of purpose. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. At church that Sunday, Sarah overheard whispers from Mrs. Anderson and her circle of friends. It's not proper, Mrs. Anderson said. Eleanor Thompson taking in that poor girl, and now this music school idea? And have you noticed how often her son Greg visits? The rumors spread quickly through the small town. Some questioned Sarah's ability to teach. Others suggested improper relationships. A few even claimed she was using her disability for sympathy. Greg appeared at Eleanor's house that evening, angry about the gossip. I can help you buy a proper building for the school, he offered. Show them you mean business. No, Sarah replied firmly. I'll use my inheritance. I need to do this myself. Over the next weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparations. She adapted teaching methods for students with different abilities. Eleanor's garage became a classroom, with Greg mysteriously appearing on weekends to help with renovations. Tommy's first lesson was a triumph. Video of him playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star spread through social media, catching the attention of other parents with special needs, children. But success brought more resistance. An anonymous complaint to the city council claimed Sarah was running an illegal business. Another questioned safety regulations for disabled students. Don't give up, Eleanor encouraged, handing Sarah an old diary. Read this when you're alone. It might help you understand why this matters so much. Before Sarah could open the diary, Tommy's mother Maria rushed in with news. Her sister's autistic daughter had started speaking after humming the songs Tommy practiced at home. Word spread. More parents called. Sarah developed a unique teaching method, combining music therapy with traditional lessons. Students who struggled in regular schools began to thrive. One afternoon, Greg watched from the doorway as Sarah worked with a group of children. You're doing something special here, he said softly. Why do you care so much? Sarah asked. Greg's expression darkened. I had a brother once, he started, but Eleanor appeared suddenly, cutting him off. Sarah, dear, the newspaper wants to do a story about the school, she interrupted, shooting Greg a warning look. That night, Sarah finally opened Eleanor's diary. The first entry was dated 30 years ago. Today, they buried my youngest son, Michael. If only someone had seen his gifts instead of his disabilities. Sarah looked up from the diary, pieces starting to fall into place. But before she could read more, she heard Eleanor crying in the next room. Moving her wheelchair quietly down the hall, Sarah discovered Eleanor clutching an old photograph, Greg standing beside her. Mom, we have to tell her everything, Greg said. Not yet, Eleanor replied. She's just starting to heal. The truth about Robert, about Michael, it would destroy all the progress she's made. Sarah backed away silently, her mind racing. What connection did Eleanor and Greg have to Robert? And how did their past connect to her present? The next morning, Sarah found a note under her door. "Your story inspired my daughter. Thank you." It was signed by Mrs. Anderson. Sometimes Sarah realized the smallest seeds of hope grow in the most unexpected places. She wheeled herself to the garage-turned-classroom, ready to start another day of lessons, unaware that her biggest challenges and revelations still lay ahead. 6 months after opening her music school, Sarah's student roster had grown from 1 to 25. The garage-turned-classroom could barely contain the weekly group sessions. "We need more space," Greg said one morning, watching Sarah teach from her wheelchair. "I know a building downtown." "I told you, I don't want your help," Sarah interrupted, but her voice lacked its usual resistance. Their conversation was cut short by Tommy running in, waving a flyer. "Miss Sarah, the Christmas concert, can we do it?" The annual Millbrook Christmas concert had always been Sarah's favorite event. Before the accident, she'd performed there every year. "I don't know, Tommy. People might not want." "We want it," Mrs. Anderson announced, stepping into the classroom. The head of the church committee's presence silenced everyone. "The church board voted this morning. We'd like your students to perform." As word spread about the upcoming concert, Sarah noticed a change in the town's attitude. Even the ladies who had gossiped about her began volunteering to help with preparations. Greg became a constant presence, staying late to help students practice. One evening, as they worked together arranging music, their hands touched briefly over the piano keys. "I'm sorry," Greg said, pulling back quickly. "I shouldn't." "Why not?" Sarah asked softly. "What aren't you telling me, Greg?" Before he could answer, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, clutching her chest. "Mom!" Greg rushed to her side. The word slipped out before he could catch himself. "Mom?" Sarah repeated, wheeling closer. "Eleanor is your mother?" Eleanor sank into a chair, her face pale. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you and Greg have some secret agenda?" "It's not like that," Greg protested. "We wanted to tell you, but..." "But what?" But poor, broken Sarah couldn't handle the truth. The tension was broken by Tommy's mother Maria rushing in. "Miss Sarah, the local news wants to do a story about the concert." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah threw herself into rehearsals, avoiding private moments with Greg or Eleanor. But she couldn't ignore how Greg worked tirelessly with the students, showing particular patience with the most challenged ones. The night before the concert, Sarah overheard Greg and Eleanor talking in the kitchen. "You have to tell her about Michael," Greg insisted. "She'll find out soon enough when Robert..." "When Robert what?" Sarah demanded, wheeling into the kitchen. Eleanor's face went white. "Sarah, please." But Sarah was already backing away. More secrets? More lies? She spent that night reading more of Eleanor's diary, tears falling as she learned about Michael, Greg's younger brother, who had Down syndrome. The entries stopped abruptly after Michael's death, with one final line: "If only Robert Mitchell had shown kindness instead of cruelty." The next morning, Sarah found Greg waiting in the classroom. "Michael was my brother," he said quietly. "He loved music, just like your students. But people, they weren't kind to him." "What does Robert have to do with it? That's not my story to tell," Greg replied. "But know this, watching you teach these kids, seeing how you fight for them, it's healing something in all of us." Before Sarah could respond, her students began arriving for final rehearsal. Looking at their excited faces, she realized that whatever secrets still remained, these children's joy was real. That evening, as she prepared to lead her students in their first public performance, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the accident: purpose. And despite her anger at their deception, she couldn't deny that both Greg and Eleanor had helped her find it. What she didn't know was that the concert would attract unexpected attention that would bring all the carefully hidden secrets into the light. The local news coverage of the Christmas concert went viral, reaching all the way to Chicago. Robert Mitchell sat in his luxury office, staring at his ex-wife's face on the computer screen. "Your wife's quite the sensation," his secretary said, placing more papers on his desk. "Ex-wife?" Robert corrected sharply, closing the video. But his hands shook as he opened the latest financial report. The Chicago project was falling apart. Mr. Mitchell, Greg Thompson walked in without knocking. We need to discuss the investors pulling out. Robert's face drained of color. What do you mean pulling out? The project was never real, Robert, just like your success was never real. You set me up. Greg's smile was cold. Karma's interesting, isn't it? You destroy someone's life, and years later, it comes back to destroy yours. As Greg turned to leave, Robert grabbed his arm. This is about Michael, isn't it? You remember his name? I'm surprised. You didn't seem to care about it when you were making his life hell. Back in Millbrook, Sarah was reviewing applications from parents across the state wanting to enroll their children. The story of her music therapy program had caught the attention of education specialists. Eleanor burst in, looking worried. Sarah, we need to talk. Robert's company in Chicago is failing. Why should I care? Because he's coming back to Millbrook. Sarah's hands froze over the papers. How do you know? Before Eleanor could answer, she clutched her chest, gasping for air. Sarah quickly called 911. At the hospital, Greg paced outside Eleanor's room. The stress is too much for her heart. What stress, Greg? Please, no more secrets. Greg sank into a chair. Michael was my younger brother. He had Down syndrome like Tommy. In high school, Robert led a group that bullied him mercilessly. Sarah felt sick. What happened to him? Michael killed himself. The night before, Robert and his friends had publicly humiliated him at a school concert. That's why you came to Millbrook? For revenge? I wanted to destroy Robert like he destroyed my family. The Chicago deal, the investors, it was all staged. Sarah wheeled away from him, her mind reeling. So helping me, was that part of your revenge too? No, Sarah, I never expected to. Greg stopped as Eleanor's doctor approached. She's stable, but she needs rest, no more stress. That evening, Sarah found a letter in Eleanor's diary. It was from Michael, written the night he died. He'd wanted to be a musician. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah, it's Robert. We need to talk. She showed the message to Greg. He's lost everything, Greg explained. The Chicago deal was a fraud. He's facing criminal charges. Why didn't you tell me this was all about revenge? Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about revenge. Watching you teach those kids, seeing you give them what Michael never had. Sarah, The hospital room door opened. Eleanor was awake. No more secrets, she said weakly. Tell her everything, Greg. Mom, you need rest. She needs the truth about Robert, about Michael, about why I really took her in. Sarah looked between them. What do you mean? Eleanor took a shaky breath. The night Michael died, I made a promise. If I ever had the chance to help someone like him, I would. When I saw you in that hospital bed, abandoned like my son was. A nurse interrupted them. Mrs. Thompson needs rest now. Outside the hospital, Greg tried to explain. We never meant to deceive you. Everything just got so complicated. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text from Robert. I'm back in Millbrook. The Children's Concert Foundation wants to give you an award. Please, let me make things right. An award? Greg asked, reading the message. The American Dream Foundation, Sarah replied. They called last week. Greg's face paled. Sarah, there's something else you need to know. But before he could finish, they heard screams from Eleanor's room. The monitors were beeping frantically as nurses rushed in. Sarah watched in horror, realizing that some secrets might come at too high a price. Robert Mitchell's return to Millbrook wasn't the triumphant homecoming he'd imagined. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his confidence shattered. The first person he saw was Mrs. Anderson at the local diner. Well, look who's back, she said coldly. Did you see the news about your ex-wife's music school? Robert had seen more than the news. He'd watched every online video of Sarah's students performing. The success she'd built from the ruins he'd left behind made his own failure even more bitter. Where is she? He asked. At the hospital, not that you care. Robert found Sarah in the hospital waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Eleanor. When she saw him, her face turned to stone. Get out. Sarah, please. I lost everything in Chicago. The whole project was a fraud. Like our marriage? Greg appeared behind Robert. You shouldn't be here. You, Robert spun around. You set me up. The investors, the contracts, all fake. Like the fake kindness you showed my brother before he died? Sarah wheeled between them. Stop it. Eleanor is fighting for her life, and you're acting like children. A doctor interrupted them. Mrs. Thompson is asking for all of you. In Eleanor's room, the old woman looked fragile against the white sheets. "Enough secrets," she whispered. "Tell her, Robert. Tell Sarah what you did to Michael." Robert's face crumpled. "I was 17. Michael was different. I was cruel. We all were. The night of the school concert. You humiliated him," Greg finished. "Made him try to perform, laughed when he couldn't." The next morning, Eleanor continued, "I found him in his room. He'd left a note about wanting to make music in heaven." Sarah felt sick. "So the Chicago deal was my revenge," Greg admitted. "I spent years setting it up. The fake investors, the fraudulent contracts, all to destroy Robert like he destroyed my brother." "You could go to jail for fraud," Robert threatened. "So could you. You signed those contracts, took loans against them. Face it, Robert, you're as guilty as I am." Eleanor's heart monitor started beeping faster. "Sarah," she reached for her hand. "I should have told you everything. But watching you teach those children, giving them what Michael never had, I couldn't risk losing that." "The Foundation Award," Sarah said suddenly. "Is that real?" The men exchanged glances. "Tell her," Eleanor insisted. "The American Dream Foundation is real," Greg explained. "But I'm on their board. I nominated you." Sarah backed away from all of them. "So even that was manipulated? Was anything in my life real these past months?" "Your students are real," Eleanor said firmly. "The lives you've changed are real. The rest is just the past demanding justice." Robert stepped forward. "Sarah, I know I can't fix what I did to you or to Michael, but maybe I can help make things right. The Foundation Award, it comes with $1 million grant. You could expand your school, help more children." "I don't want your help," Sarah snapped. "Either of you." Eleanor's monitor began beeping urgently. Nurses rushed in, pushing them all out. In the hallway, Sarah confronted both men. "I've built something beautiful from the ashes of your cruelty and your revenge. Stay away from my school, my students, and my life." As she wheeled away, Greg called after her. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know." But Sarah was done with secrets. She didn't see the way Robert's face paled at Greg's words, or hear Eleanor's weak voice calling her name. Some truths, she would learn, refuse to stay buried, no matter how hard we try to wheel away from them. The week before the American Dream Foundation ceremony brought chaos to Millbrook. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager to cover the story of the paralyzed piano teacher who transformed her tragedy into triumph. Sarah sat in her classroom trying to focus on Tommy's lesson while camera crews set up outside. The ceremony would be broadcast nationally. "Miss Sarah?" Tommy looked worried. "Are you sick? You look tired." She'd been sick every morning for the past week, but pushed the thought aside. "I'm fine, Tommy. Let's try that song again." Greg knocked on the door. "The foundation needs to do a pre-ceremony interview." "Send them away." "Sarah, please, we need to talk." "About what? More lies?" Eleanor had been released from the hospital but remained weak. She watched from her window as Greg left the classroom, shoulders slumped. "You need to tell her," she called to him. "Tell me what?" Sarah had wheeled up behind them. Before Greg could answer, Robert's voice cut through the tension. "The foundation board wants to meet with all of us." Sarah looked between the three of them. "No more meetings. No more secrets." "Sarah," Eleanor's voice was urgent. "There's something you need to know before the ceremony." But Sarah was already wheeling away. In the bathroom, she pulled out the pregnancy test she'd been avoiding taking. 5 minutes later, her world shifted again. Positive. A knock on the door startled her. "Sarah?" It was Greg. "The reporters are waiting." She opened the door, the test hidden in her pocket. Greg's face changed when he saw her expression. "What's wrong? Like you care. It's all been a lie, hasn't it? The school, the award, everything." "Not everything, Sarah. Miss Sarah." Tommy came running up. "Look what I found in the old piano bench." He handed her a yellowed envelope. Inside was a photograph. Teenage Robert standing over a crying Michael at what appeared to be a school concert. "Where did you get this?" Greg grabbed the photo. Robert appeared in the hallway. "Is that?" "The night before Michael died," Greg finished. "Mom kept it all these years." Sarah studied the photo. "He's holding sheet music." "Michael's composition," Eleanor said, joining them. "He wanted to perform it that night. Instead, I humiliated him." Robert's voice cracked. "We made him try to play it, laughed when he couldn't. The next day..." Sarah wheeled to the piano. On the music stand sat a worn piece of paper, Michael's composition. All these months, she whispered. Every time I taught these children, you were all watching, remembering him. The foundation ceremony, Greg said quietly, they want the students to perform. Using these children to ease your guilt? Sarah's voice rose. Using me? Eleanor stepped forward. No, Sarah, using the truth to heal old wounds. What truth? That Greg orchestrated Robert's downfall? That you've all been manipulating me? That I love you, Greg blurted out. The hallway fell silent. And I'm pregnant, Sarah responded. The pregnancy test fell from her pocket, clattering on the floor. Robert staggered back. Greg froze. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest. The ceremony is tomorrow, Sarah continued, her voice steady. After that, I never want to see any of you again. As she wheeled away, Eleanor called after her. Sarah, wait, there's one more thing about the foundation. But Sarah was done waiting. She had a performance to prepare for, students who needed her, and a future to protect, both hers and her unborn child's. What she didn't know was that tomorrow's ceremony would force every secret into the light, and no one would leave unchanged. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Marriott buzzed with anticipation. Network cameras focused on Sarah as she wheeled onto the stage. Her students lined up behind her. Tommy clutched his sheet music, beaming with pride. Ladies and gentlemen, the foundation chairman announced, we gather to honor Sarah Collins Mitchell, whose music therapy program has transformed countless lives. Sarah scanned the audience. Eleanor sat in the front row, looking pale but determined. Greg stood at the back, his expression unreadable. Robert was nowhere in sight. The children began their performance, Michael's composition arranged by Sarah for their different abilities. As Tommy played the opening notes, the audience fell silent. Suddenly, Robert burst through the doors. Stop! This award is a fraud. Security moved toward him, but he continued shouting. Greg Thompson orchestrated all of this. He's on the foundation board. He set everything up for revenge. The audience murmured. Cameras swiveled. Is this true? The chairman demanded. Before Greg could respond, Sarah spoke into the microphone. Yes, it's true. Greg nominated me for this award to complete his revenge against my ex-husband. She paused, wheeling to the edge of the stage. But that's not the whole truth. Robert abandoned me when I was paralyzed and lost our baby. He left me bankrupt and broken. Before that, he bullied a disabled boy named Michael Thompson until the boy took his own life. Eleanor stood up, swaying slightly. Michael was my son. He wrote the music these children are playing tonight. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. The foundation board members huddled together, whispering urgently. The truth, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the noise, is that revenge and love sometimes grow from the same seed. Greg wanted revenge for his brother. Eleanor wanted to heal from her loss. And I wanted to prove that broken things can become beautiful. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the new life growing there. These children aren't part of anyone's revenge. They're proof that music, love, and acceptance can heal even the deepest wounds. Robert pushed past security, reaching the stage. Sarah, please. I know I can't undo what I did, but let me try to make it right. How? Greg stepped forward. By exposing the award? Destroying what she's built. Stop. Eleanor's voice rang out. She clutched her chest, stumbling. Mom. Greg rushed to catch her. The room froze. Sarah wheeled to Eleanor's side. No more fighting, Eleanor gasped. Michael's music, let it heal, not hurt. Sarah gestured to her students. Tommy stepped forward, playing the final part of Michael's composition. The pure, simple notes filled the room. Robert sank to his knees. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The foundation chairman approached the stage. The award nomination may have come from questionable motives, but the work is real. The lives changed are real. He turned to the audience. The foundation will honor its commitment. Furthermore, we'll establish the Michael Thompson Memorial Fund for Music Therapy. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Greg helped her stand. Sarah, he said, I started this for revenge, but I fell in love with your strength, your heart, your vision. The baby is proof that life goes on, Sarah finished, that love can grow in unexpected places. She faced the audience. Tonight, we honor not just my work, but Michael's legacy. Every child deserves to be heard, to be valued, to make music in their own way. Tommy started playing again, and one by one, the other students joined in. Michael's composition became a symphony of different abilities, different voices, united in harmony. Robert quietly left the stage. Greg took Sarah's hand. Eleanor smiled through her tears. The cameras captured it all: the music, the tears, the healing. But they couldn't capture the deeper truth, that sometimes the greatest acts of love rise from the ashes of our deepest pain. And in that moment, revenge transformed into redemption, played out in the notes of a song written by a boy who never got the chance to perform it himself. 6 months after the foundation ceremony, Sarah and Greg stood before Pastor Mike in the same church where her journey began. The small wedding brought together their transformed community. "Love isn't just about happy beginnings," Pastor Mike said. "Sometimes it's about healing, forgiveness, and second chances." Eleanor, stronger now, sat in the front row. Her heart condition had improved with proper treatment and less stress. She beamed as Greg helped Sarah position her wheelchair at the altar. Tommy served as ring bearer, proudly walking down the aisle in his first suit. The other students formed a special choir, singing Michael's composition as their wedding song. After the ceremony, Robert approached the newlyweds. He looked different, humbler, wearing a simple suit and carrying a stack of papers. "These are for you," he handed them to Sarah. "I'm now working as a pro bono lawyer for disability rights. The foundation asked me to help expand your program nationally." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine change. "Why? Because Michael deserved better. Because you all deserved better. I can't change the past, but I can help change the future." The Michael Thompson Memorial Fund had already helped establish 3 new music therapy schools. Sarah's teaching method was being studied by major universities. But more importantly, her original students were thriving. Tommy had performed at the State Music Festival, earning a standing ovation. Other students were showing remarkable progress, not just in music, but in all areas of development. "The Today Show wants to feature our program," Greg mentioned during the reception. "They're calling it the Millbrook Miracle." Eleanor joined them, carrying a small gift. "This belonged to Michael," she said, unwrapping a metronome. "He used it to compose that piece. Now, it should help teach the next generation." Sarah placed a hand on her growing belly. "We've decided on names," she announced. "Michael if it's a boy, Hope if it's a girl." Robert, who had been quietly helping serve cake, overheard. His eyes met Eleanor's, and for the first time, understanding passed between them. "The foundation board meeting is next week," he said. "They want to discuss implementing the program in every state." "Not just the program," Greg added. "They want to change laws, ensure every child has access to music therapy." Sarah watched her students playing together, remembering how this all started, with one wheelchair, one piano, and one child everyone else had given up on. "Miss Sarah?" Tommy called out. "Can I play the special song?" He sat at the piano, beginning Michael's composition. The wedding guests fell silent, listening to the pure notes filling the church. Robert slipped out quietly, but not before leaving one final gift, a legal document establishing the Sarah Collins Mitchell Foundation for Inclusive Arts Education, fully funded and ready to launch. Eleanor found him in the parking lot. "You've changed," she said simply. "Too late to matter." It's never too late to do right. Inside, Greg knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair. "Ready to cut the cake?" "Ready to change the world," she replied. The local news crews captured it all. The wedding, the students performing, the announcement of the national expansion. But they couldn't capture the deeper transformation. How tragedy had become triumph, how revenge had become redemption, how broken dreams had become new beginnings. That evening, as the celebration continued, Sarah wheeled to the church piano. Her fingers found the keys, playing the melody that had started everything, the same hymn she'd played the day of her accident. But this time, the music carried hope instead of loss, promise instead of pain. And in the growing darkness, her students' voices joined in, creating something new and beautiful from the pieces of their shared past. The next chapter of their story was just beginning, and this time, everyone would play their part in harmony. 1 year after the wedding, Millbrook's church was packed for the annual Christmas concert. The event had grown so large, it was being broadcast live on national television. Families had traveled from across the country to witness what the media called the miracle of music therapy. Sarah, now holding her 6-month-old twins, Michael and Hope, sat in her wheelchair beside the grand piano. The stage had been modified to accommodate students with various disabilities, a design that was being replicated in schools nationwide. Eleanor, wearing her Congressional Medal of Honor for her work with disabled children, helped organize the students. At 73, she had become a powerful advocate for inclusive education, testifying before Congress about the importance of arts access for all children. "Ready, Tommy?" Sarah asked her first student, now a poised 12-year-old. Tommy nodded, adjusting his tie. He would open the show with Michael's composition, which had become the anthem of their movement. In the past year, he had started teaching younger students himself. Greg watched from the wings, holding baby Hope. The Sarah Collins Mitchell Foundation had expanded to 30 states, with plans to go international. But tonight wasn't about numbers or success. It was about remembrance and celebration. The lights dimmed. Sarah wheeled to center stage. "A year ago, we gathered here to celebrate a wedding. Tonight, we celebrate something bigger. The power of music to heal, to transform, and to unite." She gestured to the diverse group of students behind her. These children were once called different, difficult, or disabled. Today they're called musicians, teachers, and inspirations. Robert, who had spent the year working pro bono for disability rights, sat quietly in the back. His legal work had helped pass 3 state laws ensuring music therapy access for all children. Tonight, he wasn't here as a lawyer, but as a witness to transformation. Tommy began playing Michael's composition. One by one, other students joined in, each contributing their unique part to the harmony. Children with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and other challenges performed together, creating something beautiful from their differences. Sarah cradled baby Michael as she watched. The infant was named not just for Greg's lost brother, but for all those who never got the chance to share their gifts with the world. The Today Show cameras panned across the audience, capturing tears and smiles. But they also captured something more profound, a community changed by love, acceptance, and the healing power of music. Eleanor stood to address the crowd. "My son Michael wrote this music believing no one would ever hear it. Today, it's being played in schools across America. Sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest gift to others." She nodded to Robert, who walked to the stage. The audience murmured but fell silent as he spoke. "Years ago, I caused pain that can never be fully healed. But watching these children tonight, seeing how love and music can transform lives, I understand what real success means." He announced the establishment of the Michael Thompson Scholarship for Special Education, funded by his entire life savings. "It's not redemption," he said quietly, "but it's a start." The concert continued with each student showcasing their progress. Parents who had once been told their children would never achieve anything watched in awe as they performed complex pieces, some of their own composition. Sarah wheeled to the piano for the finale. The twins were passed to Greg as she positioned herself at the keys. The piece she had chosen was special, a duet with Tommy that incorporated elements of Michael's original composition. As they played, photos appeared on the screen behind them. Michael as a young boy at his piano, Sarah teaching her first class in Eleanor's garage, the foundation ceremony, the wedding, the twins' birth. A story of loss, love, and redemption, told through images and music. The final photo showed their newest project, breaking ground on the Michael Thompson Center for Inclusive Arts, a state-of-the-art facility that would serve as both a school and a research center for music therapy. When the last note faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. But Sarah's attention was on her students' faces, proud, confident, and full of joy. This was the real miracle, not the national attention or the foundation's success, but the transformation of young lives once considered limited or broken. Eleanor joined Sarah on stage, bringing both twins. Greg stood beside them, and even Robert was invited to join the group. They represented different parts of a story that had come full circle, from tragedy to triumph, from revenge to redemption, from broken dreams to new beginnings. "This is the true American dream," Sarah said into the microphone. "Not success measured in dollars, but in lives changed, hearts healed, and music shared." The students gathered around her wheelchair, and together they played one final song, a Christmas carol that filled the church with hope, just as it had that fateful day 2 years ago when Sarah's life had changed forever. But this time, she wasn't alone at the piano. She was surrounded by family, not just Greg, Eleanor, and her twins, but every student, every parent, every life touched by their story of healing and transformation. As the music soared, Sarah looked at her children, her students, and the community that had become her extended family. She realized that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its greatest challenges, and that true miracles happen not in grand gestures, but in the small moments of love, forgiveness, and healing that change lives forever. The cameras captured the final moments, the music, the tears, the hugs, and the triumph of spirit over circumstance. But they couldn't capture the most important truth, that in helping others heal, we often find our own healing. And that sometimes the longest journey leads us right back home, to a place of love, purpose, and the kind of success that can't be measured in any currency except joy. After the concert, the church hall transformed into a celebration of hope and community. Families who had once felt isolated now connected, sharing stories of their children's progress and dreams for the future. Tommy approached Sarah with a special announcement. "Miss Sarah, I got accepted to the summer program at Juilliard's youth division." This news brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. The boy who had once been rejected from every music school was now breaking barriers at one of the nation's most prestigious institutions. Robert, who had quietly helped secure funding for Tommy's scholarship, watched from a distance. A young mother approached him, pushing a wheelchair with her daughter inside. "My Emily starts classes next month," she said. "We moved here from Oregon just for this program. Thank you for making it possible." The legal work Robert had done ensuring insurance coverage for music therapy was already changing lives across the country. It wasn't redemption, but it was purpose. Greg joined Sarah, carrying both sleeping twins. "The Japanese delegation wants to visit next month," he whispered. "They're interested in implementing the program in Tokyo." What had started in a small-town garage was becoming a global movement. But Sarah's focus remained on the individual stories, like Maria, Tommy's mother, who now ran the parent advocacy program, helping other families navigate the challenges she had once faced alone. Pastor Mike called everyone's attention. "Before we end this blessed evening, there's one more surprise." He nodded to Eleanor. Eleanor stepped forward, holding Michael's original diary. "We're publishing Michael's story," she announced. "Along with his music and the stories of all the children who've played it since, the proceeds will fund scholarships for the new center." Sarah looked around the room, at Robert finding purpose in service, at Greg teaching hope to wave at her adoring fans, at Eleanor finally at peace with her past, at Tommy helping younger students with their instruments. This was more than a music program. It was proof that broken dreams could become new beginnings, that past mistakes could fuel future purpose, and that love could transform even the deepest wounds into channels for healing. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself back at the piano. Baby Michael stirred in his carrier, and she began playing softly. Not Michael's composition this time, but a new piece she had written for her children. One by one, her students joined her, adding their own parts to the melody. It was unplanned, unrehearsed, but perfect in its authenticity. This was what their program was really about. Not just teaching music, but creating space for each voice to be heard. The news crews had long since packed up their equipment, but this moment, this pure, unscripted expression of joy, was the real story. It was the story of a community that had learned to listen to all its voices, of revenge transformed into reconciliation, of broken dreams rebuilt into something stronger. As the last families prepared to leave, Sarah noticed Robert speaking quietly with Eleanor. After a year of working together, they had found a way to honor Michael's memory that brought healing instead of pain. "Next Christmas," Eleanor was saying, "we'll have the first graduating class from the center. And 100 more students starting." Robert added, "The waiting list keeps growing." Sarah wheeled over to them, holding hope while Greg followed with Michael. The twins were living proof that life's greatest gifts often come from its deepest challenges. "We should head home," Greg said softly. "Tomorrow's a big day." He was right. Tomorrow, they would break ground on the center's first international branch. Families from across the world would soon find what Sarah had discovered in her darkest moment, that music could heal what medicine couldn't touch, and that every voice, no matter how different, deserved to be heard. As they left the church, snow began to fall softly. Sarah remembered another snowy night when her world had shattered. But from those broken pieces, something beautiful had grown. Not just a school or a foundation, but a movement that was changing lives around the world. The American dream, she had learned, wasn't about personal success or revenge or even redemption. It was about building something larger than yourself, about turning personal pain into public purpose, about creating harmony from life's discordant notes. Tommy's voice called out from the church steps. "Merry Christmas, Miss Sarah." "Merry Christmas," she called back, her heart full. The snow continued to fall, covering Millbrook in a gentle blanket of white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to heal and grow. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The music had done more than heal. It had transformed them all, turning their broken melodies into a symphony of hope, love, and second chances. And in that transformation, they had all found their true purpose, their real success, their own Christmas miracle. For in the end, the greatest miracles aren't the ones that happen to us, but the ones we create together, note by note, day by day, heart by heart, until the whole world sings a new song of healing, hope, and love. Thanks for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs inspiration today. We'd love to hear in the comments about a time when someone's kindness changed your life, or perhaps share your own story of triumph over adversity. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us that even in our darkest moments, miracles happen when faith, love, and forgiveness come together. As Sarah's story shows us, sometimes our greatest pain becomes our most powerful purpose, and that's where true healing begins. When life brings you to your knees, let faith lift you to your purpose.